All right, hey guys, it's your tired teacher back again. It's almost freaking 2:30 in the morning. I really gotta cut this crap out. Like seriously, I'm gonna show up to school next week being like zombie tired, along with my, you know, crazy amounts of PPE I'm wearing, so I will look scary. But anyways, besides the point, let's go ahead and talk today about the market revolution and America's first industrial revolution. So, this is what we got going on. We've got our market revolution as a result of the first industrial revolution. So, essentially, this country is going to start growing. It's going to start growing like crazy. Because, okay, remember the War of 1812? The British had blocked our ports, so it's going to kind of force us to go ahead and start up our first factory system. Though factories were brought over a little bit earlier, as we'll see later, by Samuel Slater, but our industry is going to grow at this time. And during the era of good feeling, it grows even further. So the market revolution and the industrial revolution really go hand in hand. And in order to understand the greater outlook of the market revolution, let's go ahead and break some of this stuff down. So we're going to start to see a shift in farming. We're going to see, instead of subsistence farming, we're going to see more market specialization, where you're going to get like your big farms, right? Your big farms that produce like cash crops and stuff. Speaking of cash crops, that lays into regional specialization. Each region of the country is going to specialize in a particular good or product or whatever to promote, finance the economy and, well, get the economy running. How about that? So the South has got cash crops, and the main cash crop at this time for the South, we've moved away from the days of tobacco with Jamestown and all that, and now we are doing cotton. Cotton is king in the South. Up north, they're benefiting from the cotton production in the South, and they're springing up some textile mills. So they're turning that cotton into finished products such as like cloth and thread and like various linens and clothing and whatnot. Out west though, they are specializing in agriculture. We're talking wheat, we're talking livestock, we're talking feeding America and other countries. So essentially that's the breakdown of each region. Now we're going to start to see like a budding free enterprise system as well. So businesses will grow, and what we will see also is that we're going to see the rise of like stuff like corporations, state charters, capital investment, like things are about to get corporate here. And it's the first time in US history where things are going to go from small scale business and they're going to start going large scale. So we'll see evidence more of that during our second industrial revolution, which is aptly named the Gilded Age. But during this first one, you start to see seeds of that growing. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about the growth of cities, because obviously you need a labor source to work in our factory system, and this is where immigration comes in. We're going to see a large population increase in cities, because not only are we living longer and we got a higher birth rate, but immigration is flowing on in from places like Ireland, Germany, England, basically Western Europe. That's where it's at for immigration, especially with the Irish. So with westward expansion, we got all this available land at our disposal. Immigrants kind of see this, they're like, yeah, opportunity. Plus, basically people out east too are going to be like, yeah, opportunity. So, kind of opportunity we're talking about, of course, are farming, right? But it's also going to raise issues of concern concerning stuff like slavery, as we talked about last time with the Missouri Compromise. So, we're going to see a vast improvement to our state and national infrastructure as well. Think Henry Clay's American system. Remember, this is one of the components of it. He's going to do a lot of transportation improvements, mainly building up of canals, building up of a national road, and turnpikes. So, all of this kind of goes together and creates our market revolution. So what we're going to do now is break each of these components down and get into more detail with them, starting with immigration. So I know this map goes up to 1860, all right? 1860 is like right before the onset of the Civil War, but I still included it anyways, even though it's got some states listed that were not around during the beginnings of the market revolution, in particular like Texas. But bear with me, guys, okay? Because this does do a good breakdown of who was coming into the country and mainly which areas of the country saw high amounts of immigration. So we've got Ireland leading the pack, right? And then followed by Germany. Then we got Great Britain. We got people coming from around the Americas, like, you know, Latin America, Central America, South America, that kind of stuff. Or from Canada, Mexico, right? We got some Scandinavians coming in, and, you know, essentially others, which will include people like the Chinese later in the 1840s when the California Gold Rush happens, and various other nationalities, okay? But anyways, let's go ahead and talk about the reasons for immigration. So we're talking like push-pull factors, right? Mainly the push factors that we're going to be talking about right now. So we got a large availability of land out west. I mean, opportunity, right? That's the key thing here. So this whole notion of like America's got upward mobility, we got opportunity, we got freedom, that people in the old world, okay, mainly Europe, don't necessarily see. So their best chance, come to America, land of opportunity. Plus, they see the amount of factory jobs out east. So, I mean, jobs are readily available for them. And that's essentially where a lot of immigrants are going to settle, especially the Irish. The Irish have more of a push factor motivating them to come to this country, which is going to be the Irish potato famine, happening more or less around the mid-1840s. But anyway, speaking of the Irish are going to settle in large cities like New York City, Boston, later on with the development of Chicago. All right, the Germans will settle in places like St. Louis. So immigrants in large part are going to be victims of prejudice, mainly nativism, which is basically your hatred and disdain for immigrants. And since these two nationalities are Catholic, there's also going to be push against their Catholicism. So anti-Catholicism is also a motivating factor as well for hating on immigrants. You know, immigrants' life here in this country is a hard one. They're going to have to work very hard in their jobs, often for low pay. I mean, we're talking bottom of the barrel kind of stuff here. So, however, though, we're going to start to see the rise of political machines. A notorious one will be Tammany Hall of New York City. And though Tammany Hall plays a greater role around the 1850s and 60s, we're going to start to see, you know, people using politics to cater to immigrants for their votes. Because around this same time as well, we're starting to see more and more states lift the property restriction of voting, and thus opening this up to white males. And, well, these immigrants are white males for the most part, the Irish and Germans, right? So, I mean, you're going to start to see politicians try to gain the immigrant vote, especially in the large cities. So, just keep that in mind for later. Like I said, a lot of this stuff is going to carry over to our second industrial revolution, the Gilded Age. So, we're getting the start right here. Now, let's go ahead and talk about these transportation improvements. Let's go back with them because we covered them last time, but here, let's remind ourselves. We have the development of roads and turnpikes out east. Turnpikes will be kind of like more like your highway system out in the east. They're more like toll roads, okay? And the Cumberland Road, which is aptly named the National Road, is going to connect the country together with an overland route. I mean, this thing is paved better, more secure, and essentially it's going to extend from Cumberland, Maryland to Wheeling, West Virginia at first, and then all the way out to Illinois later on. Now, we also have like a big influx of canals going on as well. The big canal that we're talking about here is the Erie Canal, which is going to connect the Great Lakes to the Hudson River, thus providing a means to transport goods and people and ideas and communication and whatnot across this canal, out through the Hudson River and into the Atlantic Ocean. So, essential to transportation. So, bringing this all together, this is what we see going on out east. Now, we can see various roads being constructed at this time, linking various parts of the country together. You see short line railroads that are also going to develop as well. Canals. So, essentially, these are going to be the means of transportation. Now, we need something to travel through these canals, to travel upstream. We need more power to our boats, to our ships. So this is where the steamboat comes in. Robert Fulton develops the steamboat, the first one being the Clermont. And now we can travel upriver, which is freaking amazing when you think about it. Because, I mean, you wouldn't have to go with the current, you can go against it. Now, the steamship is going to make shipping faster and cheaper and more efficient for not only Western farmers shipping their goods down the Mississippi and, up the Mississippi. You can also transport people, like I said, ideas, other market goods, and essentially this will be super efficient for us. However, in the winter, what do? I mean, come on now. Rivers freeze. Canals can freeze. So, in lies the other technological advancement for transportation, which is going to be our railroads. So, our railroads at this time are going to be short lines. They're not going to extend like transcontinental, like we'll see later on with the Transcontinental Railroad after the Civil War. But for now, though, our railroad lines are pretty short. They're regional, but nonetheless, this is freaking fast transportation, faster than your horse and buggy can like move across the country. So it's reliable, it's durable, it's efficient. Now, in the late 1820s is when we start to see the locomotive pop up, but essentially this is going to help transform the country. All of these transportation improvements. Because let's take a look at the travel times in 1800. You can essentially go from New York to New Orleans, and it'd take you about 4 or 5 weeks, right? That's in 1800. Now check this out in 1830. When we start to see these transportation improvements, we can go from New York City to New Orleans, and now it only takes us 2 weeks. So again, people are going to be transported a lot quickly. Goods are going to be transported a lot quickly. And with the invention of the telegraph, information will be transported a lot quickly. So, we've got Samuel Morse developing the telegraph in 1844. And I mean, you guys heard like the beeps and the dashes and stuff, like Morse code? Yeah. So, that's how we communicate with each other. His first message is, "What hath God wrought?" And I mean, this is blowing our minds when you think about it. Because now we've got information literally being transported, within minutes. And so as long as you're near a telegraph office, you can get that message. And it is so quick. It's going to help out with politics. It's going to help out with business. It's going to help out with all aspects of our lives, essentially, that require the flow of information. News is going to be a lot quicker as well in reaching its destination. So this is amazing, and it's going to transform this country. You see telegraph lines springing up alongside rail lines. So essentially, yeah, it's going to be an amazing time for this country. But hold up, farmers, we didn't forget about you either. Farming is going to get a lot easier at this time as well, because now we got machinery that helps out Western farmers develop their land and cultivate it. So we're going to see the steel plow invented by John Deere. Yeah, the same John Deere, the factory, the tractor guy. Yeah, that same John Deere. So the steel plow is able to like carve up the tough soil out west more efficiently. The steel plow doesn't break like wooden plows would. So I mean, this is going to be an invention to transform the West. The other invention to transform the West will be the mechanical reaper by Cyrus McCormick. Now this one, I mean, if you guys can see in the picture right here, the blades rotate as the horse pulls that contraption. And essentially, it's going to do the cutting for you, for wheat, for grains. So really, this is like amazing. This is so cool what's going on. Now, another thing that's going on though, is that with these new inventions, yes, farmers' lives are a lot easier and a lot more efficient, but we got some consequences with this as well, because now we have moved away from subsistence farming to more large-scale farming, like, big corporate kind of farms are starting to pop up, albeit a little later on, like more towards the Gilded Age, but we're going to start to see the shift. Now, another consequence of this is that, yeah, now that we got all this cool machinery at our disposal, we're going to purchase more land. And with purchasing more land and machinery comes more debt to banks. So farmers will eventually suffer because of their debts. And now we need better transportation to get these goods to market. So we're going to see more improvements to the transportation we had already mentioned. So as far as back east goes, back east does benefit from these cool innovations as well that are developed during their first industrial revolution. So what we're going to see here is the steam engine is not only working for steamboats, but it's also going to work for our factory system. And we're going to have like a lot of water-powered steam engines. So back east, within our factory system, we're going to have the use of interchangeable parts. Eli Whitney brings up this idea of interchangeable parts at first with constructing, this rifle, this musket, right? So he takes that same sort of process and applies it to factory machinery. So I mean, now it's going to be pretty easy and more efficient to just swap out the parts. So in the factories out east, I mean, remember, they're taking the cotton being developed by the South. And speaking of cotton is being developed a lot faster because it's taking less time to take the seeds out, thanks to Eli Whitney's cotton gin. So thus, in the South, cotton production will also ramp up, as we'll see in the next slide here. So anyways, these textile mills that we're going to see develop out east benefit greatly from inventions such as the spinning jenny, which is going to make it a lot easier to produce thread and yarn and stuff. And we're also going to see the sewing machine, taking that finished product of the thread and producing cloth and various clothing. So the spinning jenny and the sewing machine will help to transform the northern economies, those textile mills, and these inventions definitely change things for America. Elias, Howe, and Isaac Singer with that sewing machine. Come on, man. Whose grandma's got a Singer sewing machine? The one with the foot pedal? Yeah. Guilty. I always played with that thing. But anyways, let's go ahead and talk more about King Cotton. So for the South, we had said that they're going to concentrate on cash crops, like cotton. So we're going to see, thanks to Eli Whitney's cotton gin, the massive production of cotton. Now, take a look at this chart right here. Okay, in 1790, we're only producing just over 3,000 bales of cotton per year, all right? So notice how the number skyrockets after the invention of the cotton gin. And then finally, around the time of the market revolution going on right now, during the era of good feelings, we're already producing like in the hundreds of thousands of bales of cotton. By the time the Civil War rolls around in 1861, we're in the millions. Cotton is king in the South, and it's going to drive their economy forward. It is a major moneymaker for the South and for the nation as a whole. So, like we said though, because of the invention of the cotton gin, we're going to see this increased need for slavery, right? Because now, picking the seeds out of cotton is less labor intensive. You just run it through the cotton gin and it does the work for you. So essentially, now instead of doing its intended purposes of like trying to scale back slavery, because that's really what Eli Whitney was, inventing this thing. He's like, well, if I could do a machine that does that work, maybe the people won't use as many slaves. Wrong. It actually has the opposite effect. People are going to get more slaves, and the slave trade will increase because of this. Because now, people down south are going to use slaves to cultivate the land, since they don't need to use them very much anymore to pick the seeds out. So, yeah, it's got that kind of unintended consequence. But anyways, this machine is going to transform both southern economies and subsequently northern economies because of the increased cotton production by the South. So, let's go ahead and talk more about these interchangeable parts. So, this is the style of weapon, the musket that Eli Whitney was developing, and you could see how you could just change out the parts in them, right? So, again, we're just going to use that same concept and apply it to our factory machinery. And speaking of factories, how in the world did we get these here in the United States? Well, it's up to one dude, Samuel Slater. Samuel Slater brings over the designs for the factories that he saw in Britain. He brings it over to the United States in 1790 in Rhode Island. And that's where you see the Slater mill, the first, factory in America. This dude had a photographic memory. He legit memorized the designs for a factory. It just like brought it over in his head. Like, what? Yeah, that's what happened. So, why build these in Rhode Island? Well, here's something about the East Coast. They got a lot of rivers, okay? And essentially, to power up factories like these, you need water power machinery. So you're going to see, the water mill kind of go around. You're going to see that power up, some of the machines in the factories. And of course, with steam power later on with the steam engine, you're going to need, the water source to help with that as well. So, essentially, these factories are going to benefit greatly from the interchangeable parts that were introduced by Eli Whitney. And like we said, you just swap out the part, there you go, good to go. It's going to make everything more efficient, and we're going to mass produce things now. So these early factories that we see, of course, are going to focus on textiles. Because, we got our raw materials straight from the South. So, yeah, the textile mills are going to rise up in the East. So, essentially, we're going to see mills like the Lowell Mill and, women working in those textile mills. They're going to be forced to live on site in boarding houses set up by the Lowell system. Why they included women? Well, it's not because they're progressive. No, it's because they're cheap. Seriously. That's why they allowed women to work in these factories. Cheap labor. They could pay them less than men. So, yeah, we're not woke, okay? Definitely not woke during this time. So, as far as the impact of industrialization, obviously we're going to have increased output. We can produce goods a lot faster now with the factories than we could with our cottage industries before this, where we're working out of the home, producing these fine craft goods and clothing from home and stuff. Now we're buying it from a factory. All right. So these factories as well don't really need skilled labor to work in them. You just need people to operate the machinery. So we're going to have this emphasis on the unskilled labor, and thus like immigrants and your poor, I mean, they're going to flock to these factories because you can learn how to use the machine. You don't need that fine skill anymore. And speaking of cheap labor, okay, immigrant labor is cheap, women labor cheap, child labor cheap. So that's essentially what's going to be working in these textile mills. Now, people are going to flock to the cities that house these textile mills. We're talking cities like, you know, along Massachusetts. You know, we're going to have a lot of factories there. So, big cities like New York, Boston. Yeah, that's where we're going to see people flock to. So, another thing we're going to see at this time, and it's an intended consequence, essentially. We're going to see the rise of labor unions. Well, at least the formation of labor unions. Labor unions, again, will do more stuff during the second industrial revolution, the Gilded Age, than we will see them during this first industrial revolution and the market revolution. But essentially what labor unions are going to try to do is get better pay, better conditions, better hours for their employees. So that's essentially the bread and butter issues of labor unions. All of them will push for this. We want to reduce the number of work hours per day because, I mean, let's face it, when your goal is aiming for the 10-hour workday, you know something's up. All right? They are working you like crazy. Another thing, I mean, the poor working conditions. These places were dangerous. There's so many times where, like, kids and adults would get killed in the factories because they're unsafe. Plus, you know, the low pay. I mean, you're risking your life working in the factories and you get paid like pennies on the dollar for what you're doing. So, yeah, these are issues that labor unions will fight for from now on, you know, and more in the future. And essentially, you know, states are going to try to outlaw labor unions. However, with a very important court case of the Commonwealth versus Hunt, Massachusetts Supreme Court has said, you know what, labor unions are cool, so they're legal. But other areas of the country will try to, you know, limit the scope and the power of labor unions. And they'll use immigrants to replace striking workers. They'll use economic downturns to try to dissuade people from joining labor unions. Now, essentially, this is what we see. So, the number of manufacturing jobs in these textile mills is going to increase exponentially because, I mean, yeah, we're making a ton of money off this stuff. So, essentially, this country is going to become rapidly industrialized. And this is going to work in the favor of the northern states because, I mean, they're going to have the means and the know-how to produce goods on their own. The South largely relies on either purchasing goods from the factories up north or purchasing goods abroad through imports. They don't develop a factory system like the North does. So when we get later on into like the Civil War and stuff, this is going to be detrimental to their cause. So, we are seeing the rise of big business and business organizations during this time. We're going to start to see corporations develop, partnerships, sole proprietorships. And these corporations that develop, I mean, it's going to be, you know, a group of investors together. They're going to purchase stocks. So we're going to see the rise of like the stock market at this time. And speaking of stocks, you know, we've got corporate stocks such as these that corporations sell and, you know, shareholders get hold of, right? So they basically own a stake in the corporation and not essentially like the whole shebang here. So essentially the effects of the market revolution are thus. I mean, we had specialization on the farm, we had the growth of cities, industrialization, development of our modern capitalist system, and the end of self-sufficiency in the household, whether it be, cottage industries and whatnot. And really, now we have a growing interdependency among people in this country. They depend on these factory goods. So, farmers out west are still going to feed families out east, and, they're still going to make their money that way. Standard of living is honestly going to increase because of the market revolution as well. Now, the nature of women and how they're treated definitely changes, though. How women are treated as equals, well, they're not. They're not treated as equals, not even close. Because if anything, this system, this factory system, and, the Industrial Revolution and stuff has changed that dynamic. Because back when we had cottage industries, men and women kind of worked side by side. You had more of a mutual respect in that regard. But now that we have women staying at home more, despite like the Lowell Mills and stuff, the vast majority of women stayed at home more. And they were relegated to their duties of taking care of the family and the household. And your more traditional, so-called traditional gender roles, influenced by not only Republican motherhood, but now through this new cult of domesticity. Women are really going to suffer during this time as far as like their rights go. But if you're lower class or if you're single, yeah, you are getting out of the house, you're working in the factories for low pay, mind you, right? Because essentially we're paying women less than men. So it does open up new avenues though for women. However, at what cost, right? Women are also going to choose to have fewer kids at this time as well. Unless you're part of the lower classes, then you need all the people you can get to work. So we do see an increase in child labor with the lower classes, of course. But women really don't have much control over their rights at this time. We are going to see women push for more rights and equality a little later on when we get to antebellum reform. But for now, the Industrial Revolution isn't too great for women. Like, not entirely. So, when it comes to economic and social mobility, though, we're going to see a large gap starting to emerge between rich and poor. Because, essentially, business is unrestricted at this time. They can do what they want. We have definitely applied a laissez-faire approach to business. So, your business factory owner wanted to pay you a certain amount per day, they could. They didn't have any minimum wage laws at this time, like none of that. But you still do see some social mobility occur from one generation to another versus like what these immigrants and people would see in Europe. So it still was a step above when we consider it in that sense, but not entirely. And when it comes to slavery, we thought it was eventually going to disappear. It was on its way out, and then the cotton gin came around. So slavery is here to stay. It's going to increase, and it's going to further divide our nation. So essentially, guys, this is our market revolution and our industrial revolution. And this is what we see. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. We'll go ahead and come back next time with our new PowerPoint where we're going to discuss John Quincy Adams' administration with the election of 1824. And we're going to also discuss Andrew Jackson and his Jacksonian democracy that occurs from 1828 and, for the next 8 years. So there we go, guys. I hope you enjoyed the market revolution and the industrial revolution. I will probably catch you guys again tomorrow sometime at probably a more decent hour because I gotta go to sleep like way earlier and go to school. So anyways, I will see you guys later. Bye.